so welcome to the city's Director of Economic Development, Laura Englehart. She's been in that position since 2019. Just a little background on Laura. Prior to joining city leadership, she was a partner at the Cleveland law firm of Corman, Jackson, and Krantz, where she managed and negotiated major deals to bring and retain jobs and investment in Ohio. She served as chair of the law firm's Economic Development Practice Group, advised clients on all aspects of a development project, from real estate acquisition and leasing to securing financing to negotiating favorable construction contracts, and managed multiple major headquarter relocations or expansions for companies across Ohio. And prior to that, Laura worked for several years in Washington, D.C., including 6 years in the U.S. Senate as a special projects coordinator, working on statewide priority projects for the U.S. Senate office. So Laura, thank you for being with us. I'm going to ask everybody to mute so that there's no distractions to the audio. And go ahead.
Great. Thank you so much. And good morning, everyone. And thank you for that introduction. I'm Laura Englehart. I'm the Economic Development Director for the City of Shaker Heights. I'm also a longtime Shaker resident. I grew up in Shaker. I graduated from Shaker schools, and my family and I moved back in 2016. We now live kind of near Shaker Square in the Onaway neighborhood. And so I have a presentation. I'm going to share some slides. I'm happy to take questions if I'm going on too long about something. I know we have an interest in time. I'm going to be as quick as I can. Feel free to jump in and say, we already know this, because I am going to give a little bit of background that is starting from the beginning, just to make sure everybody has some context. So let me share my slides. Are you able to see that? Okay, great. So this morning, I'm going to focus on a very brief overview of the Lee Road Action Plan. I'm going to do a brief case study of the process we used in the Van Aken district as a model that we're following in terms of process, not necessarily in the type of development. And then I'm going to look a little bit at the implementation that we've done to date since Council adopted the plan earlier this year in March, and what we have on our plate as next steps, immediate next steps. I do want to point out that there are some major public infrastructure improvements that I will outline, and they're in addition to the public infrastructure improvements. That's typically the budget you'll hear us talk about. There are other strategic actions that we're going to be taking. It's intended to be a long-term plan with phased implementation, and so we'll be hearing about this for many, many years to come. And I just wanted to make sure to set that context, because the plan is not just the infrastructure improvements that many folks have been hearing about. Are you seeing my slides change? You are. Okay, great. So does it say Lee Road Action Plan purpose at the top? Okay, thanks. It does not? Let's see.
It doesn't say purpose.
Now does it say purpose? Okay.
Yes.
I'm sorry, it did not, my slides weren't advancing, but now they are. So the planning process started already. And we wanted to have a long community process with a lot of involvement to make sure that the process was informed by the community, and that includes transportation strategies, land use strategies, economic development strategies, and all of that with the goal to create a thriving commercial district south of Van Aken Boulevard that is prettier, attractive, walkable, bikeable, transit friendly, a place that we can be proud of. So back in 2022, we started a process with the community that started with a visioning phase. We moved into a concept development phase where we looked at all different sorts of things that could go on Lee Road and what it could look like, and got feedback from the community on what people liked and didn't like, and then took that feedback and developed a plan overall. The process took over a year because of the amount of engagement that the city wanted to get and do. The traditional engagement, I guess I would say, of having a stakeholder committee and a focus group of individual stakeholders like businesses, residents, property owners. Those traditional meetings occurred in each step of the process. In visioning, we held all of those meetings. In conceptual development, we held all of those meetings. And also throughout the process, we tried to meet people where they were, instead of just assuming that people would come to a meeting that we called and scheduled. We wanted to make sure that we went to people's homes, and we held a session at Library Courts, the senior living facility on Chagrin Boulevard. A resident on Lindholm invited the entire block to her home. We made sure that we talked to folks that were directly impacted and in the area specifically. And so the plan was adopted in March of 2023. And I've put these in two columns, two buckets: the public infrastructure improvements you see on the left, and then the additional land use and development opportunities are on the right. And you see along the bottom of your screen, this is a site map, if you will, of the proposed plan with each of the elements represented. The public infrastructure improvements are largely the roadway. So to the left is north on your map. And so if you can see my arrow circling around the Lee Van Aken intersection, that's north. And then traveling south into the city of Cleveland, where it says Southern Gateway, that dotted line is actually the municipal line. And so we did a lot of work into the city of Cleveland as well. We wanted this to be seamless in transition. We want to make sure we're working regionally. City of Cleveland, County, NOACA, RTA, all of those stakeholders were involved in the creation of some of these ideas. And the public infrastructure improvements we discussed and have put into the plan are that the traffic border to border and into the city of Cleveland. So starting at the northern border of Shaker Heights at Cleveland Heights, the entire road will be reconfigured into 3 lanes of traffic, 1 lane in each direction, and a center turn lane with some medians where engineering says we can do the medians. The south of Van Aken stretch will also have a removed bikeway. So there will be bike lanes in the road north of Van Aken and south of Chagrin. So between Van Aken and Chagrin, there'll be an off-road bike path, and south of Chagrin, we're actually going to remove the lane of traffic that we remove will become a raised bike path. So along the western side of Lee Road, the lane of traffic will actually be removed and become a bikeway that is raised and separated from traffic, and also separated from the sidewalk with the tree line that will remain. So streetscape and pedestrian improvements and signalization upgrades, so all of the lights are timed appropriately for traffic. The road diet, as we call it, to change the number of lanes. We've done a significant number of traffic studies to make sure that that's possible, and traffic will actually, with the appropriate signalization and timing, be able to flow much more smoothly than it does today, despite moving a lane of traffic. And that's something we looked at very closely in the public infrastructure improvements. On infrastructure, the last thing I'll say is at this Chagrin Lee intersection here. So right now, this is the Woodlands, the nursing home. This is Shaker Town Center. Right here is Shaker Animal Hospital, and here is the Irie Jamaican Kitchen, which used to be Upper Crust. This Kenyon Road intersection will become one-way in, so it will improve the signalization where there won't be additional time where everyone's waiting for a car to come out of that area. You'll only be able to go in, and so we'll reduce the amount of pavement there and make it safer for people to cross the street. We'll move the parking to the west side of the street here along the animal hospital side, and be able to create a little bit of a public plaza and public space, potentially some restaurant space if the tenant there is interested, to create additional public space, which could allow for even closing it for a special event, for example, with the correct permit. So hoping to create additional public space there. Some of the land use and development opportunities are on this map here in red and orange. And the two that I'm going to call out specifically are this center, the neighborhood center, and the Southern Gateway allow for potential new development. We want to make sure that any type of development integrates with our existing businesses that are successful and doing well, and addresses some of the vacancy and addresses some of the underutilized or underinvested parcels and properties. So these are ideas. These are where at the time the development made sense. It may or may not happen that way, depending upon how the property owners engage with the city and our Shaker Heights Development Corporation. But the neighborhood center and the Southern Gateway were something that we heard from the community that we want to try to centralize within nodes some of the activity and the walkability, that you're going somewhere to a destination, that we're creating a community hub that creates kind of a heart of a district and can capitalize on some of the opportunities that we were able to identify through the planning process. Right here in the center, as many of you are probably familiar, are where the school buses are currently parked. We have been talking with the school district about a potential relocation of those buses in order to create some development sites and an expansion of Shelton Park that allows the park to extend to Lee, to create access to the neighborhood on foot, not by car, that creates a different type of center and uses and changes in a positive way how the community is able to access some of the both recreational and business opportunities in this area. I could probably point out a number of other things. You see the list on the screen. In the interest of time, I'm going to move on and happy to answer questions at the end. Quickly, I do want to give a brief overview of what we did in Van Aken from a process standpoint, because we are following that playbook right now in terms of process, right? So public infrastructure investments are intended to set the stage for private development. And so when we talk about all the public infrastructure investments in Lee Road, we're using a similar strategy to apply for a series of grants, try to find as much money as we can that can come into our community to invest in these improvements, and intend that the district development process will follow in phases. And so grant funding can pay for public improvements. I'll get to the budget on a separate slide in detail. At Van Aken, the city raised $19 million in grants, and our match was actually reduced to zero. Many of you know that local communities are required to provide local matches, typically about 20% for most grant dollars that we're able to raise for public improvements. And we were able to have enough partnerships to spend no money on the actual construction. And when I refer to the construction in the Van Aken public infrastructure improvements, that is the changed intersection at Chagrin and Warrensville, where Van Aken and Northfield used to go through, and then were closed off, and a six-legged intersection became a four-legged intersection. And that was the public infrastructure improvements in Van Aken that allowed to create new development parcels for future development. And so the 19 million in grants that the city raised was only for the intersection, the public improvements and that investment, which then set the stage for phase one of the Van Aken district as we know it today, and continued phases of development in construction. And so the city did spend money on engineering, utilities, legal documents, plats, real estate, to make sure that the development could happen at Van Aken. That was just about $1.3 million at Van Aken. And so we were able to invest over $20 million. Only $1 million of that was city dollars to set the stage for future development in Van Aken. Then development followed from there. Land assembly was required, working with a developer, finding that developer, negotiating with that developer. That economic development piece came after the city's investment in the infrastructure. And that's the process we're looking to follow here. It doesn't necessarily follow, 1, 2, 3, this happens completely, then the next happens, right? The phases overlap. But the process that we followed at Van Aken has been really instrumental in allowing us to be successful in raising money for the Lee Road Action Plan recommendations. So I am going to talk very briefly about implementation and what we're working on. Here's the budget that I mentioned. We are estimating more than $25.8 million in the public investment alone. That includes the road resurfacing and reconstruction, the bikeway, the sidewalks, streetscape, signals, lighting, benches, everything involved in the public areas. So that does not include any potential future private development and what incentives may or may not be needed depending on what that looks like. We have secured over $17.7 million in grants. That does leave $8.1 million left. We are hoping that additional partnerships and additional grants we're looking at will reduce that significantly. Right now, we are hoping and anticipating that the city investment could be as low as $4.1 million. And we're looking now long-term at how the city council might be willing to put some of those funds away over time into the capital budget to earmark it for those future years. I will also say, you'll see at the top of the screen, these infrastructure improvements are scheduled for 2027. That is when the majority of the grant dollars are available. Of the 17.7 that we've received, that we've been awarded, almost 13 million of that is coming from NOACA, our regional transportation body. And that is the timeline for NOACA is 2027 construction at this time. So I do want to talk a little bit about the neighborhood center specifically because it's such a critical component. This is, again, something that would be implemented over the coming years and likely after the public infrastructure improvements are done. That doesn't mean over the next 3 years we won't be working diligently on all of the elements that are required to move the buses and have discussions with the community about what exactly it looks like. But the neighborhood center is a critical piece of the plan that the community has been very excited about. And so before the construction of the public improvements, we're going to be working, the city and schools will be working together to make sure that we can move those buses, find alternative locations, identify whether there could be shared operational opportunities in that relocation. Our public works department has a fueling island. Do we need to have another one? We're having all of those conversations, lots of questions still unanswered. And there'll be a lot more information to come in the next 2 years about what that could be and lots of conversations around what it should be. But moving the buses is critical to the action plan on Lee Road. And so many of the elements in the plan cannot occur if the buses are not relocated. So this image here of an improved Shelton Park with development sites and public parking included, this is just a fit plan. This was initially what was heard in initial meetings during the Lee Road Action Plan process. That is not the plan. We will have additional discussions with the community, particularly the Moreland community and Lomond communities, around what it could and should look like and how they use the park, how they want to continue to use the park, and what that looks like. This is essentially a fit plan, and we'll need to do a much more detailed Shelton Park plan with the community to make sure that it becomes what the community wants it to become. And the feedback we got in 2022 may not be the same that occurs when this is able to be constructed years from 3, 4, 5 years from now. So there will be a lot more engagement to come as well. Here is just a rendering of the proposed neighborhood center. So this also shows some of the streetscaping where there may be some center islands that we can put in, which will be determined during the engineering process where they could be. There is a potential for pedestrian crossing right in the center. There's not a lot of opportunities to cross Lee Road between signals right now, which are very far apart. And this is an image of the proposed plaza that could extend into Shelton Park for pedestrians with development on either side. One thing I wanted to mention specifically because it's timely is that we are working, one of the elements that was identified as a strategic first action in the Lee Road Action Plan is to share parking. Right now, there are way too many curb cuts where you can see in this image that every single individual business and building has its own car access. It makes it inefficient. It makes it really challenging and unsafe for pedestrians and bicyclists to access those businesses and to just travel from place to place. And so we are working actually with the property owners and one more to the north that's not depicted here. We are already in conversations with all of those owners that are shown on the screen about, is there a way to close off 5 or 6 of these curb cuts and have an entrance on the southern end and an exit on the northern end and have shared parking? And so the city is already working with our city engineer, GPD group, to look at surveying and designing what that could look like. And we have non-binding letters of intent with all of those property owners to move forward with that process. The city is also submitting grant applications for future construction, which could occur as early as next year. And the property owners understand that they will need to put in some private investment as well. Our city's storefront program is also available for all of these properties owners and their tenants. Actually, many of these property owners are the business tenants as well, to be able to improve the facades of their building as well, so that we're improving not only the access and safety, but the visibility in this area as well. And then lastly, I'm pulling out one final item out of the strategic first actions because of the timing. We are talking about before the end of 2024, really taking a detailed look at zoning code updates on Lee Road in particular. The current zoning does not allow for many of the uses that the community asked for in the Lee Road Action Plan process. So for example, restaurants are not permitted in the current zoning district, and folks asked for a place to go have family breakfast, for example. We also want to look specifically at setbacks and why the buildings are located right in the center of every parcel. And of course, the idea here is not that we would be tearing everything down, but where there is vacancy or opportunity, should we be looking at placing buildings closer to the road to make it feel safer for pedestrians and create a better mixed use feel and district. And so that will be an ongoing conversation. There will have to be lots of discussions, public hearings, council action to change that zoning. And it will take us some time to prepare for what we're proposing that zoning to change to, with feedback from the community as well. So that's something we're hoping to start before the end of next year, could go into 2025 and be at least a year-long process to actually change the zoning. But I mention it specifically because the timing is sooner than some of the other strategic first actions. And then the last thing I am listing here, I'm not going to talk about each of these, but we do have a number of other additional strategic first actions outlined in the plan that will occur over the next 2 to 5, 6 years from now. And I'm listing them here. I'm happy to give more information on any of them. Some of these will be ongoing operational priorities. For example, supporting the business programming, generating excitement. That's going to be ongoing and use more staff time than budget asks. So there may not be something that we come to council and say, hey, we need money for X, but we're going to make sure we're doing some activity knowing that the construction is coming 3-4 years from now. We want to make sure that we're showing some progress, making sure we are continuing to engage the community in conversations, and that includes residents and business and property owners on Lee Road. So that's just one example. I won't talk about all the rest, but I'm happy to answer any questions on any of those. And very last thing, our immediate next steps are to continue to focus on the funding for the public infrastructure. And that also includes regional priorities. We've been applying for funding with the city of Cleveland jointly and talking with Cuyahoga County about their potential involvement. We'll continue with the shared parking engineering and pilot that I mentioned earlier, and continue on the public infrastructure design and engineering as early as 2024 and 2025. So I'm sorry I talked so long. I'm happy to answer any questions that anyone may have. Annette, I think you...
I tried to unmute, sorry. Okay, Lynn, go ahead.
Thank you. That's a really great presentation. I was lucky to be one of the shareholder people, so I've seen a lot of it, but it never ceases to make me thrilled for Shaker. I had a question about the commercial code enforcement that's ongoing. I mean, I go to a few of the businesses, but not many of them, but from the street, they look like they could use some significant code enforcement. What's that about?
Yeah, that's actually a conversation that we need to have. We heard from many folks throughout the planning process that not enough seems to be done. There are some good discussions that we should all have, and I'm interested in your opinions on the carrot versus the stick, right? We have a storefront program. We try to get property owners and businesses to invest their own money, and then we reimburse them up to 50% up to a capped amount to make those exterior improvements. And if they do have things that are against code and violations, then they have to use the money on that first. And so that's the strategy we have been largely taking to date, and doing a lot of proactive knocking on doors and saying, hey, did you know we have this program? The enforcement mechanism has not been as strong as it was in past years. It is largely complaint-based. So when we receive a complaint, our building and housing department will go out and do an inspection and cite the owner. So the discussion that needs to happen in the next few years is, should there be a systematic code enforcement for commercial properties that does not exist today? That does require significantly more city resources. We don't have an inspector on staff to do that on a regular basis. What is the annual cycle? What should that policy look like? And so the recommendation of the plan is to have the conversation to put that policy together and figure out how much money on an annual operating budget that would require, and talk to city council about that. So that needs to happen, but it's going to take a little time to put a new policy together.
Is there really a stick other than you cite them? Can you find them currently? Does anything happen other than being cited?
If they don't fix their violations within the time period they are provided and required to per the building and housing department citation, then yes, it could go into pre-prosecution, into prosecution, and that process does take additional building, housing, and law time for our staff. But we've done that a number of times for significant violations.
Thanks.
Linda?
Thanks. Wonderful presentation, exciting project. The bus depot. Can you talk a little more about the challenges, the process? Will taxpayer money, additional taxpayer money be required? Do you know at this point, or are you looking for solutions within existing budgets, et cetera, et cetera?
Yes. All of the above. There are more unanswered questions than answered questions right now. But what I can say is that we have potential. We're looking at alternative locations right now. We don't have enough information, nothing to share today. Hopefully next year we'll have more information to be able to talk about what sites might be viable, both inside the city and potentially within a certain radius outside the city. If there is a publicly owned site, that would not cost what a privately owned site would cost. So there are priorities that we would need to discuss around, whether a privately owned site may be a better location, but has additional cost to it, or may have less environmental remediation, but has a purchase price. And so because we don't have sites on the table right now to do a compare and contrast, I don't have enough information to say exactly where the money would be coming from, but we know the major factors are: one, will it fit? Two, what type of environmental work is going to be needed on the future site? What is the building cost if it doesn't have a building on it already? And so we know the questions. We just have to get the sites together, do the compare and contrast, have the discussions around it. And that's the information we're out seeking now. As for the actual current site, we know that environmental remediation will be needed because there are fuel pumps, because it's been auto use for many, many years. And we're looking at both state and federal grant opportunities to help pay for both the assessment and potentially the future remediation, assuming we're able to use the site for future development and park and recreation use. After that is the discussion around what city public dollars might be needed for parks and recreation that fit within a larger recreation discussion. So this will be part of the recreation planning discussion that's coming up with this site included in it. And is there a future development partner that would be willing to invest in part of those public improvements as part of the development as a community benefit? Is that possible? And so these are long conversations with phasing at which different pieces come in at different times.
Thank you. Very thorough explanation. Appreciate it.
Any other hands? Any other questions? Erin?
Yes, thank you. What was your strategy for connecting with the residents to seek their feedback? How did you get word to them about the meetings and, these smaller conversations you had?
Yeah, thanks for that question. We did first we mailed postcards for the initial meetings to everyone in Moreland, Lomond, and in Ward 1 in Cleveland. We went 3 or 4 blocks into Cleveland and mailed postcards to all of those residents as well. We, in the economic development department, we know who every business owner and property owner on Lee Road south of Van Eeken is. So we contacted them directly by email and personal contact and to have those meetings, and every single business and property owner was invited to every business discussion throughout the whole process. Those postcards were for the formal meetings. The informal ones are the harder, how do you reach people where they are? And we did do, we had a table at the library to reach people. We did talk with the Lomond Association. We did talk with individual residents that we knew had been involved in the community that happened to live in the area, and asked, how do you want to engage your neighbors? And that's how we ended up with, for example, on Lindholm, the whole block got together, everyone was invited. We also have been doing a lot of work over many years within the Moreland community. They have formed a Moreland network, and there are a lot of folks that have been engaged in different ways in the last 6 or so years outside of a formal association. And so they hold monthly neighbor nights, and that neighbor night is for them, not for outside organizations or institutions to come in and say, hey, we want to talk to you about our thing. There were enough residents that were proactive in Moreland and wanted to hear about this and be involved and make sure that their voices shaped it, that they brought it to and asked us to come to neighbor night. And also we knew enough folks that had been engaged in that network that they introduced us to other people. And how we got to talk to everyone who was interested in library courts is that there's one resident there who's very involved in the community and said, I want you to come to us. And we did. So we tried to make sure we had individual conversations that led us to more and more individual conversations. And yet you can't do enough. So there are still folks we haven't reached, and there are still people that are concerned that we're going to tear down their park tomorrow. And so we really have an ongoing obligation to do more engagement.
Thank you.
Any other questions? Laura, I'm curious about I'm sorry, Meryl, go
Very
ahead.
quickly, Laura, is it possible for you to send us your slide presentation?
Absolutely. Yes. I'll send it to Annette after this meeting.
That'd be great, because those maps are very interesting, and I would like more time to study those. Thank you. I was curious about the collaboration. You said regional partners, and I'm assuming that the emphasis there would be on Cleveland and Ward 1. So maybe you could talk about that a little bit.
Sure. Yeah. So we had a number of representatives from the city of Cleveland on our stakeholder committee, and that we've kept informed, and they've kept us informed throughout this whole process and continue to talk. We were just on a call with them earlier this week. That includes Councilman Joe Jones, Mayor Bibb, and the planning director, Joyce Wong, the Office of Capital Projects for the city, Jamie DeRosa, and then the county's Capital Works, Public Works Department. All of those folks have been involved since the beginning. The City of Cleveland Ward 1 and the Harvard Community Services Center are also in the middle of engagement right now, and the Cleveland Neighborhood Progress has hired somebody to help them with a plan to continue the conversations in a more in-depth way. Because while we invited a lot of residents and businesses in Cleveland to our process, they also need to have their own process if we truly want to make this seamless and have improvements occur from Cleveland Heights all the way down to 480, right? So more engagement is happening now in Cleveland. And we are talking about potentially having one construction manager, or figuring out how this is a phased process in which perhaps Shaker's construction starts and it phases to the south, or, you know, we're in the middle of those conversations now. The county also has resources to potentially take over regional projects of this size, but it would be a very significant size if you add to our $25 million the additional costs in Cleveland. And so it will likely need to be phased, but right now we're talking with the county in Cleveland specifically about how this could become one project, so that there is no, so that it is seamless, and continues beyond Shaker's border. The other regional partnerships that are really important are with RTA and NOACA. So RTA has been at the table the entire time. There's a very important bus line that goes down Lee, and coordinating and whether a stop might need to move and what their ridership numbers look like. We're going to be getting into all of that in the engineering process, but they've been involved from the beginning so that there won't be any major red flags, we hope, once we get to those stages, so that they could have their input from the beginning.
Thank you. Very interesting. Okay. I was also curious if you had any research on what kind of market there might be for residential housing there if you increase that height limit, put in new apartment buildings, mixed use buildings. How do you know what the need might be?
Yeah, we've done an initial economic and market analysis as part of the Lee Road Action Plan. Some of that was focused on business market, some of that was focused on housing market. It was not enough of a deep dive into housing to tell us exactly what product we need in this area, but it was more general and regional around, here are price points that we may be missing in our market. From a business perspective, if we want to attract certain businesses and we want to have housing for those folks to live in, here are the types of housing price points and that we should look at. The analysis also strongly recommended having move up and move down types of, I am at this point in my life, I am going to need a larger place to live at the next step in my life, or on the other end, I have this very large house and I want to downsize at the next stage of my life, and creating those step up and step down options on a holistic basis. So we do have some data around what we may need and the number of units and the potential price points, but that changes so quickly, especially in today's housing market, that when we're ready to do the development, we're going to need to make sure we're doing additional market analysis and absorption studies.
Thank you. Any other questions? Lisa? Yeah, unmute.
My bad. Oh, my bad. Thank you, Laura, for this information. It's very interesting to see. I was just wondering, and you might have stated this a little bit when you're talking about Van Aken, but are they, is any part of this to attract new people into the area, or is it mostly to like work with what is already there? Because I know that there's a lot of like the Prospect Canine is the dog boarding facility. It's thriving in that area. And then you have the new Shaker Heights veterinarian hospital at the corner of Lee and Chagrin as well. And so I'm just curious, like, is there any talk of like ways to pull in people from the greater community into that neighborhood that might be coming there for other things like Prospect Canine, which, you know, people love their dogs. So, and I know that people love that business.
Yeah. And so
just talking about the business development end of it, like in what kinds of things you were thinking potentially could attract, especially with more high-end housing, potentially, or not high-end, but apartment building style living, that kind of stuff. So if you could speak to that a little, thank you.
Yeah, thank you. And thank you for the question, because we're going to need to talk through some of this over time as well. Certainly from a business attraction standpoint, we have room and ability within some of these obsolete buildings to either improve them and make spaces for new small businesses to come in, or potentially have some new construction if we're able to get 4 or 5 of these buildings in a row where it makes sense to tear them down and do new construction. That is going to be long, slow, ongoing, figuring out where the opportunities are and whether they make sense for the owners of those properties, the businesses that may already be in those properties, who's here that wants to expand now. We actually have 2 businesses in the dealership that have run out of space, and we're hoping to keep them located on Lee Road. So we're doing a lot of on the ground conversations with everybody who's there now to prioritize helping them succeed and making sure that anybody we do bring in is an added amenity for the residents and for the business community, from an additive instead of competitive or concerning perspective. And I say the word concerning not lightly, because there are a lot of concerns that we have heard regularly that this will be the next Van Aken. We are not coming in and tearing everything down and building new and displacing what's there. This is not the type of development we're talking about. This will be slow and incremental, and you won't see a big shiny new building overnight that changes the character of the district. This will be a different type of development. And I think we need to have additional conversations, particularly with the Lomond and Moreland communities, about the type of development they want to see, so that we are working with the community instead of putting things in the community without that engagement. So it's not a simple answer. Yes, we have plenty of businesses that contact us on a regular basis looking for available spaces, and we often don't have available spaces in our small commercial districts in Shaker to accommodate a lot of the requests that we get. And we're actively seeking to create those spaces and make improve spaces to make them available and continue to support small businesses. And the last thing I'll say is we really want to focus on entrepreneurship as well. We have a lot of really creative folks in our community that have home-based businesses. We have a lot of folks in our regional community that are working with the Urban League and ECDI and other organizations that may need space. And we have a lot of residents that have ideas about maybe they want to move into the building with their commercial idea. And it's really tough to take your business from your home to a commercial space. And what are we as a city doing to help them do that?
And, you know, like AO is very popular in Van Aken for, I mean, it's expensive to have a space there, you know, but something like that would be great to bring in smaller businesses and providers, potentially a whole host of different kinds of businesses that, you know.
And so the facility that's called the dealership, that used to be a car dealership, is a co-working and small office space, and it is full. So we see the demand for that type of small space. Some of the buildings along Lee Road that are successful and do look nice and have friendly owners that are community minded, they have 3 or 4 tenants in them that they have broken up a small building into 500 square foot suites and rent it out to 4 people. So there is some of that happening, and we can really capitalize and make that a part of the future strategy as well.
Thanks. Well, Laura, that was really, really interesting. Thank you so much for explaining it. I've been involved off and on with the project, and I learned a lot from that presentation. So I'm sure everybody else did. I want to respect everybody's schedule and let you go off and do what you need to do on a Saturday. And we may follow up with another request in several months to get the updates.
Sure, and I'll add a slide that has my contact information and then send it over to you, Annette, and you can circulate it.
Perfect. Thank you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everybody.
Have a great day.
You too. Bye-bye.
Bye.